Hello and welcome back to my channel. I hope you guys are having an amazing Sunday. Today we're reading Genesis last chapters before going into Exodus. We'll read about Jacob's death and Joseph's death. So, homework was Genesis 48, and it's about Jacob's testimony to Joseph, and then Joseph making Jacob bless his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And you know how like back then you're supposed to bless the oldest more than the youngest, right? It seems like Jacob purposefully blessed the youngest more than he did with the oldest, and Joseph noticed that and tried to fix his hands, but Jacob refused. Yeah, it says, but his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He too will become a tribe, and he too will be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his offspring will become a populous nation." And I'll read my notes. I said that Jacob's testimony was a testimony of grace, not of personal merit. Jacob did not say how faithful he was to God, but how faithful God was to him. The reason why I said that is because in Genesis 48 verse 15 to 16, Jacob said, "The God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all harm." And about how like the right hand was supposed to be on the oldest, I wrote that the right hand is associated with God's strength, favor, and help. This is why Jesus is described as sitting at the right hand of God the Father. The right hand was the position of favor and exaltation. I also said that I didn't understand why Jacob would choose to bless the youngest over the oldest when he literally stole Esau's birthright. So why would he want... Wait, let me read before I get confused. I said Jacob stole Esau's birthright, so with his grandson he blessed the youngest over the oldest. I don't quite get why he did that. Maybe a fear of history repeating itself. But and then I used the app that I told you guys about, wait, let me check. Hold on. The undoing word, right? Where it says commentaries, and it said that it's because in the Bible the idea of firstborn is often a position of preeminence, not necessarily meaning the first out of the womb. For example, David had the status of firstborn. That's my dog, he wants to come in. For example, David had the status of firstborn even though he was the youngest. And then now we could read Genesis 49. It says, "Then Jacob called his sons and said, 'Gather around, and I will tell you what will happen to you in the days to come. Come together and listen, sons of Jacob. Listen to your father Israel. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my strength and the firstfruits of my virility, excelling in prominence, excelling in power. Turbulent as water, you will not excel, because you got into your father's bed and you defiled it. He got into my bed.'" Remember how Reuben slept with his stepmother / Israel's concubine? So I also wrote that because of Reuben's instability, the birthright was divided. And then in verse 5 it says, "Simon and Levi are brothers. Their knives are vicious weapons. May I never enter their council. May I never join their assembly. For in their anger they killed men, and on a whim they hamstring oxen. Their anger is cursed, for it is strong, but their futile, for it is cruel. I will disperse them throughout Jacob and scatter them throughout Israel." Right. Jacob and Israel are the same people. So I'm guessing the reason why he said I would disperse them throughout Jacob and scatter them throughout Israel is because they were like, I feel like Jacob knows that he wasn't like when he was known as Jacob, he wasn't like the perfect father because of what he did to Esau, but God redeemed him as Israel, right? And I wrote that Simon and Levi, you remember how they killed men for revenge for their sister. And I quote, when the believer suffers from their sin, they should draw near to God and anticipate that in mercy he will turn suffering into blessing. And I also wrote that this shows the principle that the sins of one's past can come back and haunt them. Even when forgiven, those sins may carry consequences that must be faced for eternity. Oh, and I remember there's another Bible verse that says, be angry but do not sin. They were angry and they sinned and they killed a lot of men. But I wrote that either way, Simon ended up getting the curse. Simon ended up getting a curse while Levi ended up getting a blessing, because later on, when we get introduced to Moses, the Levites ended up being like anything that belonged to God belonged to them as well. Does that make sense? You'll see when we start reading more about Moses. We're gonna get there because we're already in Exodus. But anyway, so in verse 8, it talks about Judah. Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the necks of your enemies. Your father's son will bow down to you. Judah is a young lion, my son. You returned from the kill. He crouches, he lies down like a lion or a lioness who dares to rouse him? ? The specter will not depart from Judah, or the staff from between his feet, until he whose right it is come. What? Wait, what? Who dares to rouse him? The specter will not depart from Judah, or the staff from between his feet, until he whose right it is comes, and the obedience of the peoples belongs to him. He ties his donkey to a vine, and the coat of his donkey to the choice vine. He washes his clothes in tongue twister. He ties his donkey to a vine, and the coat of his donkey to the choice vine. He washes his clothes in wine, and his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth are whiter than milk. I wrote that Judah is a good example of God's grace to the undeserving, because I also wrote because Judah, he's the one that suggested a prophet motive to get rid of Joseph. Like, remember when they threw Joseph in the pit? Judah was the one that said, instead of making him starve, let's sell him, right? And Judah also did not deal faithfully with his daughter-in-law Tamar. He's the guy that ended up I hope you remember. Okay, and I also wrote that even though it was his idea to sell Joseph, it was a smart idea that came with a benefit instead of letting him starve to death. Him being called lion is I thought it was like him being sneaky but smart. And then later on, Jesus is called the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Now we could read Genesis verse 13, where it says, Zebulun will live by the seashore and will be a harbor for ships, and his territory will be next to Sidon. And I wrote next to it that later on Zebulun later on is my English correct? Okay, so later on, Zebulun ended up being the largest number of David's soldiers and his army of any single tribe. Okay, verse 14 says, Issachar is a strong donkey lying down between the saddlebags. He saw that his resting place was good and that the land was pleasant, so he leaned his shoulder to bear a load and became a forced laborer. This is amazing how is Jacob able to foresee the future like that? Like, I feel like either the Holy Spirit came into him and started to prophesy. Oh, and I think this is actually the first man to ever prophesy God's words. Yeah, because all of these things actually ended up happening later on in the Bible, right? But okay, we were talking about Issachar, right? Notice how they said that they would he saw that his resting place was good and that the land was pleasant, so he leaned his shoulder to bear a load and he became a forced laborer, right? That's because of their size and abundance. They would later often be targets of becoming servants, and I put strong but lazy because they did not strive for the good land. Okay, verse 16 talks about Dan will judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan will be a snake by the road, a viper beside the path that bites the horse's heel, that its rider falls backwards. Next to it, I wrote that Samson came from the tribes of Dan, right? They were also the troublesome tribe. They were also the troublesome. Sorry, so many messages from one person. By the way, Dan, the tribe of Dan is the troublesome tribe that later introduced idolatry into Israel. And then verse 18 says, I wait for your salvation, Lord. And then verse 19 says, God, G-A-D, will be attacked by raiders, but he will attack their heels. Next to it, I said, they also supplied many fine troops to David. And then verse 20 to 23, it says, Asher's food will be rich, and he will produce, oh Lord. Okay, sorry. Asher's food will be rich, and he will produce royal delicacies. Naphtali is a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns. Joseph is a fruitful vine beside a spring. Its branches climb over the wall. The archers attacked him, shot at him, and were hostile towards him. Yet his bow remained steady, and his strong arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, by the name of the shepherd, the rock of Israel, by the God of your father who helps you, and by the Almighty who blesses you with blessings of the heavens above, blessings of the deep that lies below, and blessings of the breast and the womb. The blessings of your father excel the blessings of ancestors, and the bounty of the ancient hills may the rest of the head of Joseph on the brow of the prince of his brothers. Benjamin is a wolf. He tears his prey. In the morning he devours his prey, and in the evening he divides the plunder. These are the tribes of Israel, 12 in all, and this is what their father said to them. He blessed them, and he blessed each one with a suitable blessing. Verse 29 is Jacob's burial introduction, which says, oof, give me a second, my laptop's about to die. So, I am back. Okay, so, verse 29 is about Jacob's burial instructions. Then he commanded them, I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my ancestors in the cave in the field of Ephraim to Hittites. The cave is in the field of Machpelah near Mamre in the land of Canaan. This is the field Abraham purchased from Ephraim, the Hittite, as burial property. Abraham and his wife Sarah are buried there. Isaac and his wife Rebekah are buried there, and I buried Leah there. The field and the cave in it were purchased from the Hittites. When Jacob had finished giving charges to his sons, he drew his feet into the bed, took his last breath, and was gathered to his people. Okay, now we could read Genesis 50, the last chapter of Genesis, which titles Jacob's Burial. Then Joseph, leaning over his father's face, wept and kissed him. He commanded his servants, who were physicians, to embalm his father. So they embalmed Israel. They took 40 days to complete this, for embalming takes that long, and the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days. And I think I read somewhere that when you're like a very important man in the Egyptian culture, they would mourn for you for 72 days. So they're saying that like Jacob was almost a very like nobleman for Egyptians. I don't remember what it said, but like something like that. So when the days of mourning were over, Joseph said to Pharaoh's household, "If I have found favor with you, please tell Pharaoh that my father made me take an oath, saying, I am about to die, you must bury me there, in the tomb that I made for myself in the land of Canaan. Now let me go and bury my father, then I will return." So Pharaoh said, "Go and bury your father in keeping with your oath." Then Joseph went to bury his father, and all Pharaoh's servants, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt went with him. Wow. Along with all Joseph's family, brothers, and his father's family. Only the dependents, their flocks, and their herds were left in the land of Goshen. Horses and chariots went up with him. It was very impressive procession. When they reached the threshing floor of Atad, which is across the Jordan, they lamented and wept loudly, and Joseph mourned 7 days for his father. When the Canaanite inhabitants of the land saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, "This is a solemn mourning on the part of the Egyptians." Therefore the place is named Abel Mizraim. It is across the Jordan. So Jacob's sons did for him what he had commanded them. They carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the field near Mamre, which Abraham had purchased as a burial property from Ephraim the Hittite. After Joseph buried his father, he returned to Egypt with his brothers and all who had gone with him to bury his father. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said to one another, "If Joseph is holding a grudge against us, he will certainly repay us for all the sufferings we caused him. This is not the time." So they sent this message to Joseph: "Before he died, your father gave a command." I feel like that's a lie. "Say this to Joseph: please forgive your brothers' transgressions and their sins, the suffering they caused you. Therefore, please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father." Joseph wept when their message came to him. I feel like Joseph wept because it's like Joseph showed you guys so much kindness. I feel like that's how we are with God. God already told us he forgave us, but we're holding on the grudge for God. Cause I feel like, yeah. Anyway, my point was that Joseph was mostly crying because he thought that, is this how low you guys think of me? I already told you guys I forgave you guys. I brought you guys to the richest part of Egypt. You know, anyway, I'm just gonna ramble if I continue. So he wept when the message came to him. His brothers also came to him, bowed down before him, and said, "We are your slaves." But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You planned evil against me. God planned it for good, to bring about the present result, the survival of many people. Therefore, don't be afraid. I will take care of you and your children." And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. And then the last one is called Joseph's death. Joseph and his father's family remained in Egypt. Joseph lived 110 years He saw Ephraim's son to the third generation. The sons of Manasseh's son Machir were recognized by Joseph. Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will certainly come to your aid and bring you up from this land to the land he swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Joseph made the sons of Israel take an oath. When God comes to your aid, you are to carry my bones up from here. Joseph died at the age of 110. They embalmed him and placed him in a coffin in Egypt. Okay, I kind of have a lot of notes. First of all, I said that Joseph had a lot of love, and how at first, when I was reading it, which was kind of a long time ago, I said that sometimes people truly don't understand forgiveness. And I mentioned how beautiful it is that instead of getting offended, he reassured the brothers. And I also said how I inspired to be like Joseph. Because I feel like I would have been offended, but instead of being offended, he comforted them, right? And I also wrote that only by coming to Egypt only by coming to Egypt could they be preserved and then grow to be a distinct nation. And I said how beautiful it was that this shows me to not rush or be impatient with God's promise. I also said that often the problem found in loving others and gaining freedom from bitterness is really a problem of not knowing who God is and trusting him to be who he says he is, to do what he says he will do. I also wrote that Genesis ends with looking forward to the continuation of God's eternal, loving, wise plan. Joseph died looking forward to God's unfolding plan of redemption, because notice how he said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will certainly come to your aid, bringing you up from this land to the land he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. To end with this, I said every Christian should be able to see the overarching and overruling hand of God in their life, to know that no matter what evil man brings against us, God can use it for good. Lastly this time, you may not see the promise in your timeline, but surely the generations after you will be blessed by your obedience. Oh, yeah. Interesting story. I love it. And I wrote the date that I finished Genesis, and I said how I took forever, but I did it. I'll continue. Anyway, yeah. Next video will be in Exodus 1. Thank you guys for listening to me. I hope you guys have an amazing week. Remember that I care for you, but God cares for you way, way, way more. Bye-bye.